The dirt was loose around her face, and she could barely breathe. When Marcus heard the muffled screams coming from beneath the forest floor, his hands were already bleeding from digging. But what she whispered when he finally pulled her out, words so quiet only he could hear, would change both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Because some secrets aren't meant to stay buried, and some acts of kindness unlock doors we never knew existed. If stories like this touch your heart, we'd love to have you join the Sage Stories family. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a story about the incredible power of human kindness. And please, drop a comment below to share your thoughts on this journey we're about to take together. Marcus Jin hadn't planned on being a single father at 32. But when his wife Emma passed away from cancer 2 years ago, he found himself raising their 6-year-old daughter Lily alone, working double shifts as a hospital orderly just to keep their small apartment in the suburbs of Portland. Every morning was a carefully choreographed dance of packing lunches, braiding hair he was still learning to manage, and dropping Lily at school before racing to the hospital. Every evening was homework, dinner from whatever he could scrape together, bedtime stories, and then collapsing into bed only to do it all again the next day. That Tuesday in October started like any other. Marcus had just dropped Lily at her after-school program and was taking his usual shortcut home through the wooded area behind the elementary school. It was a path he'd walked hundreds of times, a quiet reprieve where he could decompress before heading to his night shift. The autumn leaves crunched beneath his worn sneakers, and for a moment, he let himself breathe. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost convinced himself it was the wind. But there it was again, muffled and desperate. A voice crying out from somewhere that made no sense. Marcus stopped, his heart beginning to race. The sound was coming from the ground itself, from a spot about 20 feet off the path where the earth looked recently disturbed. He ran toward it, dropping to his knees. The screams grew louder, more frantic. Someone was buried here. His mind raced through everything he'd learned in the hospital about emergency response, about keeping calm, about prioritizing breath and time. He started digging with his bare hands, tearing at the loose soil and leaves. His fingers hit something hard, a wooden board. No, a makeshift coffin. Terror flooded through him, but he didn't stop. He clawed at the dirt around the edges, searching for a way to pry it open. His phone. He should call for help. But every second counted, and the voice beneath was weakening. Marcus made a choice. He kept digging, throwing earth aside with increasing desperation, until he found a gap where the boards met. He wedged his fingers in and pulled with everything he had. The wood splintered, then gave way. The woman inside gasped for air, dirt falling from her face as she sucked in desperate breaths. Marcus pulled her up and out, supporting her weight as she collapsed against him. She was probably in her 60s, well-dressed despite the dirt, with graying hair matted to her head and mascara streaked down her cheeks. She was shaking violently, clutching his shirt as if letting go meant falling back into that darkness. He held her steady, speaking in the same calm voice he used with panicked patience. "It's okay, you're safe now, I've got you, just breathe." She nodded against his chest, still trembling. When her breathing finally steadied enough for words, she leaned close to his ear and whispered something that made his blood run cold. "They're still watching. Please, you have to act like you don't know me. Like this was just a random rescue. Your life and your daughter's life might depend on it." Marcus felt ice spread through his veins. How did she know about Lily? But her eyes held such genuine fear that he trusted his instinct. He nodded slightly, then pulled out his phone and called 911, his voice shaking as he reported finding a woman buried in the woods, giving the dispatcher their location. The woman, who later identified herself to the police as Catherine Westbrook, claimed to remember nothing. She told the officer she'd been jogging, was attacked from behind, and woke up underground. She didn't know who or why. She seemed disoriented, traumatized, playing the part perfectly. Marcus gave his statement, just a guy taking a shortcut who heard screaming and started digging. The police thanked him, called him a hero, took his contact information, and told him they'd be in touch. Catherine was taken to the hospital. Marcus went home to shower off the dirt and pick up Lily, his mind spinning with questions he couldn't answer. 3 days later, a woman showed up at the hospital during his shift. She was younger, professional, wearing an expensive suit. She introduced herself as Catherine's daughter, Amanda, and asked if they could talk privately. In a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria, Amanda told him the truth her mother hadn't been able to share with the police. Catherine Westbrook was the founder and CEO of a medical technology company worth over $400 million. 6 months ago, she discovered that her business partner and her own nephew were systematically embezzling funds and planning to stage her death to take full control of the company. She'd been gathering evidence, preparing to go to federal investigators, when they'd acted first. They'd kidnapped her, buried her alive in those woods, and planned to report her missing after a few days, eventually presumed dead. They hadn't counted on someone taking that particular path, on someone caring enough to dig. Amanda's voice cracked as she explained that her mother, even in those terrifying moments underground, had recognized Marcus's hospital ID badge when he'd pulled her out. She'd seen his name, looked him up while being treated in the hospital, and learned about his daughter, his circumstances. And she'd made a decision. She wanted to help him, but the men who tried to kill her were still free, still dangerous, and still watching. If they knew she'd identified them or told Marcus anything, both Marcus and Lily could become targets. So Catherine and Amanda had worked with federal investigators quietly, pretending Catherine remembered nothing while building an airtight case. Now, 3 days later, both men had been arrested. The evidence was overwhelming. They were facing attempted murder charges along with fraud and embezzlement. It was finally safe to tell Marcus the truth. Amanda reached across the table and took Marcus's hands. She told him that her mother wanted to meet with him properly, to thank him, to tell him herself what his courage had meant. She also mentioned that Catherine had a proposition for him, something that could change his and Lily's lives, if he was willing to hear it. The meeting happened that weekend at Catherine's home, a beautiful house in the hills overlooking the city. When Catherine opened the door, she looked different from the terrified woman he'd pulled from the ground. She was composed, elegant, but her eyes held a depth of emotion that made his throat tight. She hugged him, and he felt her tears on his shoulder as she whispered thank you over and over. Inside, over coffee and cookies that Lily happily munched while playing with Catherine's golden retriever, Catherine explained her offer. She'd been thinking about her own mortality, about what mattered, about the random grace of a stranger who'd saved her life. She wanted to establish a foundation in memory of Marcus's late wife Emma, focused on supporting single parents who were struggling to make ends meet while raising children alone. She wanted Marcus to help run it, to bring his real-world understanding to help shape it into something meaningful. The salary would allow him to quit his night shifts, to be home with Lily, to breathe for the first time in 2 years. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. He looked at Lily, who was laughing as the dog licked her hands, and then back at Catherine. He managed to ask why him, why so much? Catherine smiled, a sad, knowing smile. She told him that in her worst moment, when she'd given up hope, when she'd been sure she would die in that darkness, she'd heard his voice. She'd felt his hands refusing to stop digging. She'd experienced the kind of pure, selfless goodness that most people go their whole lives without witnessing. She said the kind of goodness deserved to be multiplied, to ripple outward and touch more lives. The foundation launched 6 months later. The Emma Chin Foundation has already helped over 200 single parents with childcare costs, medical bills, and educational expenses. Marcus works there full-time now, and Lily comes to the office after school, doing her homework in a bright room filled with books and art supplies. Catherine stops by often, having become something like a grandmother to Lily, someone who shows up for school plays and birthday parties and brings too many presents at Christmas. Marcus still thinks about that October afternoon sometimes, about the impossibly thin thread between life and death, about how easily he could have worn headphones that day or chosen a different path. He thinks about the whispered warning that kept him and Lily safe, about trust given and honored in the darkest of moments. And he thinks about how one choice to care, to dig when it would have been easier to call for help and wait, created a ripple that continues spreading outward. Because that's what kindness does. It doesn't just help the person in front of us. It transforms them into someone who helps others, who passes it forward, who becomes a living testament to the power of human goodness. Catherine was saved from the earth that day, but in many ways, so was Marcus. He was saved from drowning in his own struggle, from the suffocating weight of doing it all alone, from forgetting that hope still exists in this world. Sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. Sometimes a single moment of courage, of choosing compassion over convenience, unlocks a future we never could have imagined. And sometimes the whispered secrets shared in moments of crisis become the foundation of bonds that last a lifetime. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced or witnessed an act of kindness that changed everything? Share your story in the comments below. Because every act of goodness, no matter how small it seems, has the power to ripple outward in ways we cannot predict. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.